Hi there, it's Miss Gretchen coming to you with another Bible story today. Do you like my little gnome here with his white beard and white mustache, holding some fireflies in his little jar? He looks like he's got wisdom and maybe a bunch of years to go along with his gray whiskers. What do you think? Well, our Bible story today is about a man of wisdom who probably had some white whiskers, just like this gnome, at least in his later years. But we're going to start his story when he was a baby. So, um, we're going to be talking about Moses today as a hero of faith in the Bible. You probably know some things about Moses, and that will help you understand the rest of the story. But let's jump back a step. We've been talking about Joseph, and before that, we were talking about Abraham. And I told you that Joseph is Abraham's great grandson. Well, Moses is actually related to both Abraham and Joseph. So Abraham's son was Isaac, and then Isaac's son was Jacob, who's also called Israel. And then one of Jacob's sons is Joseph, right? Who we talked about last time. And Joseph worked for the Pharaoh in Egypt. He was sold into slavery, but then he became great in the house of Pharaoh, and he brought his whole family to Egypt. Well, one of Joseph's brothers is Levi. So we're going to trace down Levi's lineage now. They're in Egypt, right? Because Joseph brought his whole family and all his brothers. So Joseph's brother Levi. So Levi's son was named Kohath, and then Kohath's son was named Amram. And then Amram had two sons, Moses and Aaron, and they had a sister as well. But our story is going to pick up with Moses and his brother Aaron. And again, they are descendants from Levi, who's Joseph's brother, and they're all in Egypt, except it's been a couple of generations. It's been quite a long amount of time. And when Joseph was there, all of his family had favor in the eyes of Pharaoh in Egypt. But after several generations, we find that the Israelites, which is what all these people are called now, because they're all descended from Jacob or Israel, the Israelites are slaves now. They no longer have favor in the sight of Pharaoh. And so that's where Moses' story picks up, still in Egypt, but the Israelites no longer have favor. Now they're slaves. So we're going to start in Exodus chapter 2. And a fun fact about the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they're called in German the books of Moses, first book of Moses, second book of Moses, etc. So kind of interesting, we find that Moses is actually a pretty important guy, and in some languages, those first 5 books of the Bible are actually named after him. All right, so Exodus chapter 2, verse 23 is where our story starts. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So these people are crying out in prayer to God, and he's hearing them and responding. What an amazing thing. God hears our prayers too when we cry out to him, when we're joyful and when we're sad. And these people were in slavery, so they were so upset and hurting, and they cried out to God and he heard them. Well, here's what God does. We're going to jump over to Exodus chapter 4, verse 18. So Moses has been born despite it being illegal for baby boys to be born in Israel at this time. Moses was born, he was saved, he was brought into the house of Pharaoh and raised in Pharaoh's household. And then actually something else happened. Moses saw 2 people fighting, and he killed one of them defending an Israelite. And it came to be known that that had happened, and they said, well, wait, are you just going to kill anyone that does something wrong? And so Moses actually fled because he had done that. He had done something that was pretty horrendous. He had become judge and killed a man. So he left, and then he gets married. And all this time he's been been speaking with God and faithfully following God, we find that that God has been meeting with him and tells him that he needs to go back to Egypt. So Moses responds to that. He hears God tell him he needs to go back to Egypt, and here's what he does. This is Exodus 4, verse 18. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, so his wife's dad, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace." And the Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. So he's already received the staff of God so that he can show them signs. Hey, I really am coming as a messenger from God. Here are the signs that God gave me to show you. Well, when Moses gets back, here's what happens. This is Exodus 4, verse 27. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went. So we see that Aaron is obedient too. Moses goes back to Egypt like God told him, and Aaron goes to meet Moses like God told him. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the wilderness to meet Moses." So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him to speak, and all the signs that he had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people, and the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshipped. So we see that because of the actions of Moses and Aaron walking faithfully with God, that people turn back to God. And ultimately that's what we're living for, right? Is that we would serve God and see other people turn back to God as well. So lots of other things happen in this story, and you'll get to hear more of them in the video that we're going to watch today. We know that that there are plagues that come on Egypt before Pharaoh finally lets the people go. And we know that even when Pharaoh lets the people go, he then chases them down with chariots, tries to get them back. We know that Moses is going to lead the Israelites through the desert, and they're going to have to wander in the desert for 40 years. God's going to send manna to feed them. So he literally gives them food in the desert when they have nothing else to eat. And then we know that eventually Aaron actually, or Moses and Aaron are going to lead them to the promised land. So these are the 12 tribes of Israel that will eventually end up in the promised land. And so much of this happens because Moses is faithful. He heeds what God says. He listens to God, and then he obeys. So Lord, I just ask that we would be people who would listen to you and hear your word, and we would obey. So amen. And this guy here probably is not exactly what Moses looked like, but it's neat to think about when we're older and we have maybe gray or white hair like that, lots of years that we've lived and wisdom. Is somebody going to be able to say that we were a hero of faith, that we listened to what God said to us and that we obeyed, that we were faithful in that, like Moses or like Joseph or like Abraham? So I'm going to leave you with that today, and I hope you enjoy the story. God bless.